friends, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, hi, my name is Kim. I am an author, illustrator, and here on my channel I love to talk about books and I like to do videos about my writing and just around living a cozy, I would say, lifestyle. So if you like all those kinds of things, feel free to subscribe. I post quite frequently here on my channel and I would love to just have you here. So friends, I was thinking about how I have not updated you guys on any of the books that I have read recently, what I thought about them. I think the last reading wrap up that I did was back in January and that was already almost 3 months ago. So I figured that it is time to do a little reading update, let you guys all know what I have been reading, what I thought about them, and just all the good gossip on these books, okay? So I am going to be updating you guys on what I've read in February and in March, not in April because obviously this month is still not over. So if you guys are new to my channel, I mostly love to read fantasy books. I love to read fictional books, anything that has a cozy fantasy setting, mystery books, spooky books. I love reading graphic novels. I love a good middle grade. I've been slowly making my way into more historical fiction, which is pretty nice. I've been really enjoying historical fiction lately. So the books that I'm going to be sharing are in that realm. And I have a total of 9 books that I'm going to be sharing with you guys today. Has this ever happened to you guys, okay, where you guys have like a really good reading month and then the next one is just kind of like it kind of goes down the drain? So in February I read a total, I want to say, of 7 books, and then in March I read 2 books in March. So that was kind of what the last 2 months has been looking like. But you know, it happens. In this channel we read for pleasure, not for how many books we can knock out in a month, okay? Just putting it out there. So I'm going to be sharing the books that I've read and what I thought about them in a rapid style format, just for the sake of not making this video super long. So with that being said, friends, grab something cozy, warm to drink, grab some water, grab some snacks, and let's talk about some books. Okay, I just realized that I didn't turn on my candle, and I usually like to light up a candle when I am talking about books just to set the vibe. So I need to go get more candles, by the way. I'm just lighting up this tarot candle that I have, which I told myself I was never gonna light up, but I've had it for so many years now and I think I'm okay with it. We're gonna set this back here in the backdrop to set the cozy vibes. So the first book that I read in February was a 5-star book. It is rare. Actually, in January and February, the first books that I read have been 5-star reads, and so excited about that. I've gotten really lucky. So the first book that I read in February was Blood Debts by Terry J. Benton Walker. Oh, you guys, this book had everything that I love, okay? It had witches, it had New Orleans, that was the setting. It had a sort of power structure that it was really believable and I really enjoyed reading about. But honestly, mostly it was the witches set in New Orleans. I am obsessed with New Orleans. I love anything, movies, TV shows, books that are set in New Orleans, and this did not disappoint. By the way, if I'm looking over here, it's because here are all my notes, okay? This is a dual POV, okay? So we're following 2 siblings and they are twins, and they come from a powerful line of witches that are from New Orleans. So in this world, the twins' grandmother was the head witch in charge, if I may say so, of the town. She was the one in charge, or she was in charge of the witches in this town. There's kind of like a power structure, like a government of witches in New Orleans, and the twins' grandmother was the head witch in charge, until that is she got dethroned, because I can't really remember, but I think she got accused of something. So she got dethroned, she ended up passing away, and then the twins' mother was the one next in line. But then out of nowhere, she got sick from this mysterious illness and no one could tell what it was. Of course, the twins, it's a guy and a girl, took matters into their own hand and they found out what was making their mother sick. And of course, there were some haters in this storyline, and they were doing some stuff to the twins' mother to make her sick. But it doesn't stop there, you guys. There is still a lot more drama with other witches in the town. So it is witches fighting witches, okay, in this town. And the twins, they are making a stand. They're fighting for their family. They themselves don't have the best relationship because they did lose their father, and one of them is sort of blaming themselves for what happened to their father. It's a lot of family drama in between themselves, but also they are trying to fight for justice for their family because there's some weird sus things happening with what happened with their grandmother and how she passed away. You really get to see these siblings fighting for their family, trying to fight the system, the magical system in this world. I also really loved that the witches were POC, and I really loved how the author implemented themes of racial discrimination into the storyline. That for me made it seem more believable because those are very much real things that people in today's world still continue to battle and face. So I really loved all these elements combined, intertwined into this very magical story. I love this book. It was everything I wanted for my first book in February, 5 stars. And then the next book that I read was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Now this was my first Ali Hazelwood book that I've ever read, and you guys, I personally did really enjoy this book, okay? I gave this book a 4 stars. It made me relive my Teen Wolf, The Secret Circle. These are all shows, by the way. Vampire Diaries. These are all shows that I just used to love and adore while I was a little teenager and just wanting to consume anything that was just fantasy. That is what Bride did for me. It felt like I was back in that moment in my parents' living room, just watching all these things on a, I don't know, Sunday morning, just binging all these shows. That is what Bride did for me. So Bride, this is a fantasy novel set in the Omegaverse. Mind you, I mean, I know I watched like Teen Wolf and all of these wolfy shows growing up, but I did not know what in the world an Omegaverse was. And you guys, I don't know if I'm glad that I looked up what an Omegaverse was and what happens in the Omegaverse, or if I should have just stayed clear, because the things that I found out, you guys, I can never unread or unsee. So this is a story about a vampire named Misery who must marry an alpha werewolf in order to preserve her lineage or preserve her family or whatnot. It's one of those cases. She agrees to marry this alpha werewolf simply because she believes that he had something to do with her best friend disappearing. So they end up marrying, and of course she doesn't really, I mean, she thinks he's hot, as she says, but she doesn't really, they don't really fit in. She's a vampire, he's a werewolf. Those two classes don't usually would marry each other. So it starts kind of like an enemies to lovers. I would say it does have a little bit of a slow burn. They end up obviously falling for each other, and eventually Misery ends up figuring out what happened to her best friend and if this alpha werewolf had anything to do with it. I did like the power structure in this storyline, though it was a bit confusing. I wish there was more of a description as to what the overall power dynamics are in this world. They were a bit confusing, didn't fully understand it, but I did love the banter. I thought it was quirky. I thought it was funny. I really enjoyed Ali Hazelwood's writing style. I wouldn't say that I would read any of her more urban or contemporary books. I am a fantasy girly to the core, and so that's why I ended up picking up Bride. But this did what it needed to do. I really loved it. It took me back into my young adult years. I ended up giving this book a 4 stars. And yeah, I loved it. The next book that I read was That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. You guys, okay, this had cozy, spiciness, quirkiness. It had all of these things that I didn't think could be meshed together, but I really enjoyed. This is a fantasy novel about a spice farmer named Cinnamon who one day, as she is coming home from a long day of work, she has had a couple of drinks in her, and this dragon ends up falling from the sky, falls on Cinnamon, and he immediately says, hey, you have to help me locate this evil witch who has imprisoned all of my people. And Cinnamon's like, no, you're creepy and evil, I'm not gonna help you. So eventually then they end up striking a deal, and she's kind of forced into helping him, which that's a little weird. She goes along this long trip with him to locate this evil witch, which, by the way, this evil witch is this goddess that this entire town praise, but they look as this goddess as someone who is kind and nice and someone that they pray to, which I thought was a really cool gateway into telling us that, hey, this person that you guys have been praying to the whole time is actually an evil witch that has imprisoned my people. That was a nice surprising element there. So Cinnamon and this evil dragon person go on this long journey to locate the witch, and of course they end up falling for each other. And it is spicy, you guys. It is spicy in a way that I didn't know a dragon could be spicy with a human. I don't know how that worked, but it ended up working, you guys. Okay, it worked, and it was quirky, it was funny. I loved all the fantasy and even cozy elements to this storyline. I love that our main character was a plus size POC woman. Okay, the representation in this, I loved every single thing about this book. It was amazing. The writing style was very subtle and welcoming. It was very easily accessible. I wasn't just reading something and I was like, wait, what? Let me go back and read it, because that, I find that is oftentimes what happens when reading very like fantasy, even high fantasy. You're like, my brain, that's how it works. I'm reading something, I'm just like, wait, what did just happen? What happened? What did I just read? Kimberly Lemming does a really great job at writing very subtle, very chill, very like welcoming, if that makes sense. I ended up giving this book a 5 stars, and I cannot wait to collect the other 2 books. I think it's That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted. These titles are hilarious. Okay, That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf, and then That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Human. I cannot wait to collect those 2 other ones. The next book that I read was A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon by Saara Hawley. I ended up giving this book a 3 stars. It wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad story. It was just kind of like a story, you know? It was just a story that I read. I did end up listening to this in audiobook format, but this story is about a witch who has a lot of pressure on her by her mother. Her mother puts a lot of pressure on her to be the best witch she can be, but our main character, whom I forgot her name, oh my gosh, I forgot her name, but our main character, she struggles with her magic. She can't seem to make correct spells. She is doing all the wrong things in her spell work. Things are just not coming up right. One day she's practicing one of her spells, and she accidentally ends up summoning a demon. And this demon, when he is summoned, there needs to be a bargain striked. So the only reason these kinds of demons ever get summoned is when the person who is summoning them wants to strike a deal. They want something, and then in return they have to give up their soul. It's one of those cases. So this demon that our main character ends up summoning, he cannot leave this world until she asks him for something, and therefore she then has to give up her soul, and he cannot leave until that deal is done. So with her understanding this, she kind of just is like, well, give me time. I don't know what I want. I didn't mean to summon you. So because her mom is all up in her business all the time, she comes over one day, her mom, and she sees the demon there, and she just very nervously, just from the top of her head, is just like, oh, that's my boyfriend, even though they're not together. He's just staying there because she accidentally summoned him, and she doesn't want to tell her mom that because her mom is really hard on her. So the demon is staying at our main character's house in the meantime while she tries to figure things out, or tries to find a spell to send him back where he came from. But at the same time, when that's going on, there's like this thing happening in her town where I think it's her local forest is sort of like dying. By the way, I forgot to mention, she loves like plants, so she wants to study plants, but her mom's kind of like, no, that's not what witches do. So I guess that's where like the disparities happen between her and her mother, where they just don't see eye to eye. But anyways, there's something going on in this town, in her forest, and she's really heartbroken about it because she loves plants, she loves nature and all of that. So she's also trying to figure out what's happening, and it kind of happened around the same time that this demon showed up in her house. So she's trying to figure out what happens, and they end up putting 2 and 2 together, and something weird is definitely happening in this town. I really love how the author explored mother-daughter relationships and how complex they can be sometimes, and how daughters can be very complacent to the wishes of their mothers. So I really love this exploration. I found that I related to that so much, and it was very nice to read about sometimes this very hard topic in a fantasy book like this. Overall, I really loved the storyline, but I think like that surprising element really lacked. And it was, like I mentioned, it was just a story. It was a great story to read to pass time, but I would say that it wasn't like a very memorable story. But I've always seen this book around since it came out, and I've always wanted to read it, and now I read it. The next book that I read was Lightfall, you guys, by Tim Probert. I gave this book a 5 stars. It was the cutest thing ever, and it explored real live hard things in this fantasy graphic novel that I was just like, oh, my heart. It was so wonderful. Okay, so in this story we are following a little girl whose name is Bia, and Bia lives with her grandfather. She was adopted by this man, but he is her grandfather. I guess I wouldn't say a man because he is actually a pig. He is a pig wizard. So he's a pig and he's also a wizard. And this pig wizard, he makes tinctures and potions for the local town folk. And he is also the keeper of what is called the Endless Flame. I don't know exactly what the Endless Flame does, but I know that it is something that is very sacred and it is in his protection. So Bia and her grandfather live a pretty cozy and quiet life out in the woods, away from people. Very cozy and cute graphics, you guys, so cute. And then one day Bia is going on a walk, and randomly she comes across this person whose name is Cad. Again, I wouldn't say he's a person because he's definitely like a sort of creature. So his name is Cad, and Cad tells Bia, hey, I am looking for a pig wizard. Do you know where I can find him? I need his help to relocate my family. And Cad is a member of what are called the Galdrians in this world. And the Galdrians are a race that has thought to have been long been extinct. And he is looking for the pig wizard to help him relocate his family, because clearly Cad is alive, so their race is not extinct. So Bia agrees to take him back to her home to meet her grandfather. And when they both go back to her house, the pig wizard is nowhere to be found. The only thing that the pig wizard has left behind is the jar with the Endless Flame and a very mysterious note addressed to Bia from him. So Bia is someone who struggles with panic attacks and anxiety, and the way that the illustrator draws these moments that can be very heavy is portrayed very genuinely, as well as what Bia does, her tactics to be able to overcome a moment of panic attack or anxiety. And I really resonated with this because I feel like many of us struggle with anxiety and panic attacks, and I saw myself a lot in Bia and what she does to sort of overcome these moments, or even when she is being described as having a anxiety attack. So rather than Bia and Cad waiting around for the pig wizard to come back home, they decided to go out and look for him. They take an adventure to go and look for her grandfather. Obviously this makes Bia very anxious. She's never been without her grandfather. There's a lot of moments where she has panic attacks and anxiety, but Cad is so wonderful and helps her through it. So they go on this long adventure, and they might or might not find her grandfather, and they might or might not find out what this endless fire is. Now this is a trilogy, okay? I believe the 3rd installment to this trilogy came out this year or is coming out this year. I am so excited to collect all these books. Such a huge staple that this is going to be in my graphic novel collection. I adored this graphic novel so much. If you love amazing illustrations, coziness, a great fantasy story with some real life elements of just real life problems that happen, then I highly recommend the Lightfall series. I cannot wait to read the other 2 books. Highly loved it. I gave this book a 5 stars. All right, you guys, and the last 2 books that I read in February were actually 2 books that were part of my Patreon book club. By the way, I do have a book club that I do over on my Patreon that I call Spellbound Manor, and our book club is called the Storykeeper Society Book Club. So if you love to read fantasy books, cozy fantasy, witchy, paranormal, mystery, murder mysteries, then I highly recommend for you to check out my book club over on my Patreon. So for February, there was a tie for what book we wanted to read, and Faebound by Saara Arifi won, as well as Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. Folks had the option to either read Faebound or to read Legendborn. I read both of them, and you guys, they were great. They were great. Faebound in particular was my favorite. Okay, Faebound by Saara Arifi, which came out that month actually. Where do I even begin with Faebound? Okay, Faebound, this is a story about fae, elves, and humans, okay? And there's a lot going on. The story really starts off where there's already a war happening, and the elves are fighting, I believe, other elves for territory. I forgot really what the war was even about, but there's a war, and we're following our main protagonist, whose name is Yaron. Yaron is part of the elven army, and she is leading her troops into a war. So the day that she ends up leading her troops to a war is actually a trap, and they get bombarded, and pretty much almost her entire army end up dying. So because of this, Yaron is banished from her homelands, which I thought was messed up. So she ends up being banished, and that caused her to just leave. So while she's gone, Yaron ends up coming across this magical place where the fae live. And the fae in this world, I believe, have long thought to have been extinct. It was quite the surprise for her when she came across this land. Actually, she didn't even come across it. She got captured because she ends up killing this magical creature that exists in this world. And to the fae, this magical creature, they are sacred. And to the elves, this magical creature, they need to kill them in order to possess their powers. Which, you guys, I thought was amazing, okay? I really love a good story where magical creatures are involved. And this gave me Avatar vibes, like magical creatures, you know, like those flying birds that the Avatar fly, that they connect with their braids. It was like one of those moments, okay? The way that these magical creatures are written, I think, was like the best part of the book for me. I mean, the plot was also very great, but oh, I'm a sucker for a good magical creature. So elves and fae, they have different morals, clearly. Yaron is then taken a prisoner for killing this magical creature. She's kept as a prisoner, but then some stuff happened and she's able to possess magic like the fae do. I'm not gonna say any more about that. You need to read it for yourself. There's just like so much happening, but in a good way, you guys. Not to mention that Yaron has a little sister named Lettel, and Lettel can read prophecies. So Lettel is really close to her sister. She goes and tries to locate her sister after she's been banished, and she too is captured by the fae, and thus they take her and this other guy that she's with to the fae lands. Yaron is still very much committed to go back to her homeland and prove her innocence and make amends with the queen of her homelands, which, by the way, she's in a romantic relationship with. Oh, you guys, there's just so much that happened. I don't want to say more because then I'll be giving it off what exactly happens, but the surprise elements in this storyline were just like, I was shocked to say the least. The magical elements, the magical animals, the storyline, the plot, the twists and turns. This, I believe, is also going to be a trilogy. Only the first one came out this year, so I am excited for the other two books. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with myself after having read this book. This really reached a level of fantasy perfection. I mean, it wasn't perfect, right? There was some things that I found like, ugh. But it did something to my brain that I'm just like, I want to live in this world. This world is great. The drama, the magic, the twists and turns, the surprising element. This was great. This was great in so many levels, you guys. You guys need to read Faebound. If there's a book that you need to read in this list, it's Faebound. I personally really loved it. I gave this book a 5 stars. First it was a 4 stars, but you know what? I'm gonna give it 5 stars. It was great. It was really great. Now the next book that I read for my book club over on Patreon was Legendborn, like I mentioned, by Tracy Deonn. I ended up giving this book a 3.5 stars. Now this is an urban contemporary retelling of Knights of the Round Table. I will say that I'm not a huge fan of urban contemporary stories, even if they're in the fantasy world. It's just not my favorite thing. I really want to just read stories that are just solely in a fantasy setting. Nothing that has to do with the real world. But you know what? Here and there, there'll be some that are urban contemporaries that I'm just like, oh, that was that was good. But this one was good, okay? We are following our main character whose name is Bree, and Bree lost her mother at a young age, and she is struggling a lot with her mother's death. So she ends up going to this high school where there's like this program where you can stay and live at the high school. I forgot what those, like a boarding school, a boarding high school, okay? She ends up going to one of those, and this is set in the South. She goes there with her best friend and their roommates. Everything's fine and dandy until one day Bree comes across this secret society called the Legendborn. Things happen, she gets more involved than she wanted to, and I kind of feel like that she's just looking for something to put all this rage and energy she's feeling inside because she's still struggling with her mother's death. So she ends up joining the Legendborn. Honestly, I cannot even tell you exactly what the Legendborn are because there's so many elements that follow the Knights of the Round Table story. There are the Knights, and then there are the Legendborn, and then there is Marlin, and I just wish that the magical story structure was a little bit more, I don't know, like more information on it, because I was a little bit lost on how these elements work, the magical elements or the magic system, as well as the rubric of like, oh, is it the Knights and then the Legendborn, or how does that, what is the structure on that? I was a little bit confused on that. So Bree gets involved with the Legendborn, and she slowly ends up finding out that the Legendborn might be involved in her mother's death. So she gets involved with the secret society. There's a lot of things that end up happening. There is a love triangle, sort of, which was a little bit awkward. I didn't fully like that. It just didn't feel natural, I want to say. Our main character does seem to be struggling with a lot of trauma, a lot of grief. I don't know, I feel like it was a great story, but there were some things that I just found were either not much information on or a little too much information that it made the rest really feel dull. I don't know, like it was like a weird balance. Also, I remember sort of reading the Knights of the Round Table story when I was very young, but I honestly forgot exactly what the story is even about, so maybe that is also why I struggled with the story a bit. But I mean, I am a sucker for secret societies. I love a good secret society moment, okay? And this was really good. Also, I listened to the audiobook, and I feel like for this kind of story, the way that my brain works, it would have been better for me to have read the physical book. I feel like for me, when I'm reading a physical book, I comprehend more what is happening, especially if it's a book where the world is very complex. I think that's also why I struggled a bit with this story, was because I read it in audiobook format. But overall, I really did enjoy the book. Now in March, like I mentioned, I read 2 books. The first book that I read was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is a fantasy story set in Regency, England, and this is sort of pitched as a Bridgerton meets Howl's Moving Castle, which I thought was very adequate. In this story, we are following our main character, who is Theodora Eddings. And when Theodora was young, she was almost abducted by this fairy. The only reason why she didn't fully get abducted was because her cousin came and stabbed this evil fairy on the leg with some scissors. So the fairy ended up leaving, okay? But he did leave with Theodora's half soul, meaning that left Theodora, or Dora for short, with a very unique personality. Theodora doesn't really experience fear or embarrassment or shame, and because of that, she feels like she's never gonna fall in love because she can't feel a sense of love. So part of her emotions, I would say, are missing, and that is what the Fae did take from her. So Theodora is now living with only half of her soul. So now, as she's older, her and her cousin are very close, and her cousin is courting, and she goes with her cousin to these balls and stuff as her cousin is courting, and Theodora ends up meeting this lord who is a magician of sorts. He has magic, and he is kind of the ass. You know, he's kind of like mean and grumpy for some reasons that I'm not gonna say here. So they have like a very unusual friendship in the end, and Dora might end up having feelings for him, might not, who knows. I mean, she thought that she could never have feelings for anyone because of her situation. But this lord ends up finding about her condition, and he wants to help her. So he ends up researching ways of how she can retrieve her other soul, and it's quite the journey, you guys. It's quite the journey to even the fairy realm. okay, which was very interesting. I thought it was funny to read about someone with half a soul and how that would feel like and sound like if part of your emotions were gone or you couldn't really feel shame or embarrassment. I mean, that would be nice, right? If we couldn't feel shame or embarrassment. I could do without those. But it was nice to read about someone, or about that perspective, I would say, especially in a setting where it's Regency England. I thought it was unique. I thought it was a very nice story. I loved it more than I thought I was going to, and for that reason I ended up giving this book a 4 stars. Now the next book that I read in March was my Patreon book club pick, and that was A Lullaby for Witches by Hester Fox. This is a historical fiction novel about 2 women in 2 different timelines. So one is from the past and one is from the future. It is set in Salem, Massachusetts, and in the present time period we are following one of our main characters, whose name is Augusta. Augusta has everything wrong in her life that you could possibly imagine. Okay, she has a not great boyfriend, she has a not great living situation, she has a not great job. I feel bad for this woman, until finally one day she lands her dream job at the Harlow House, and she is, I forgot what her role is, but the Harlow House is a museum and she works kind of like behind the scenes. She's like a curator and something in an office. Okay, I forgot exactly what her role was, but that's kind of what she studied. She wanted to work in a setting like this. While she's working there, Augusta quickly has some weird moments happen. Some very paranormal and eerie things happen. She starts having hallucinations, things start moving around in the house, some very creepy ghostly stuff ends up happening. And so then it ends up like going back in time with our other main character, whose name is Margaret Harlow, and you kind of get a peek at who Margaret was, which the museum where Augusta works at was the house of Margaret. There's not really much information on Margaret, by the way. It's mostly like the men that lived at the Harlow house. It goes back in time with Margaret and who she was. Margaret, back in her time, I think in the 1800s, she was known as like the local witch. She was kind of like the outcast, and then you're introduced to a little love story that happened to Margaret. But point being is that Margaret was murdered, and those are kind of like the hallucinations that Augusta is getting in present day moment. And so Augusta becomes very fixated on Margaret's story, and you know, one thing leads to the next, and it's very creepy and eerie, and Augusta's just trying to figure out what in the world happens to Margaret, and then it goes back in time to Margaret's story. And it's just the drama, you guys. The drama in this story is very much real. I was not a fan of the writing style, I would say, even some of the historical aspects, I would say, and I would even say also that the witchy part of this really lacked. I mean, the story is called A Lullaby for Witches. I think the witches part really lacked in this story. I wish I would have seen more of that in this story, but the thing that did keep me reading and going was the fact that the story itself was actually pretty good. I wanted to find out also, just like Augusta, what in the world happened to Margaret. And sure enough, we end up finding out at the end, and needless to say, I was not happy. I was not happy with what happened to her. Justice for Margaret, you guys. It was crazy, but I ended up giving this book a 3 stars. I really did enjoy it just because of the story, and I just wanted to find out. It was a great historical fiction novel. I did a whole reading vlog with my Patreons. That video is available over there if you guys want to check it out on Patreon. I do exclusive content over there as well. So friends, those were the 9 books that I read between February and March. I had a blast reading these books, and I just wanted to update you guys on what I thought about them. Luckily, I have been getting some good books in the mix here. Nothing that I have DNF'd so far, nothing that I'm just like, oh, this was complete trash. I've been having fun reading. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, friends. Thank you so much for joining me here. Let me know down in the comments below if you would read any of these books. Have you read any of these books? Remember that you can create the life that you want because you so deserve it. I will be seeing you guys in a video very, very soon. Take care and bye for now.